and you're watching my channel, Rebels and Revolutions. This is, sadly, sorry it's too sad, our last episode on the Cuban Revolution and its aftermath. But after 5 episodes, click the links in the description box below to see any or all of them. I think it's time to move on. Today, we will be talking about the most dramatic aftershock of this revolution, the Cuban Missile Crisis, which took place on October of 1962 and became a direct and dangerous confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. This drama unfolded during the Cold War and was the moment when 2 superpowers came closest to nuclear conflict. The crisis was all about calculations and miscalculations, communication and miscommunication, and fear and even greater fear. After the failed US attempt to overthrow the Castro regime in Cuba with the Bay of Pigs invasion, click on the link below, in July of 1962, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev reached a secret agreement with the Cuban leader Fidel Castro to place Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba to deter any further future invasion attempts. Construction of several missile sites began in the late summer, and US intelligence discovered evidence of a general Soviet arms buildup in Cuba, including Soviet Ilyushin or Il-28 bombers during routine surveillance flights.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island.
And on September 4th, 1962, President Kennedy issued a public warning against the introduction of offensive weapons into Cuba.
The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere.
On October 14th, a US U-2 aircraft took several pictures clearly showing sites for medium-range to intermediate-range ballistic nuclear missiles. Some of JFK's advisors, including all the Joint Chief of Staff, argued for an airstrike to destroy the missiles, followed by a US invasion of Cuba. Others favored stern warnings to Cuba and the Soviet Union. The president decided upon a middle course. On October 22nd, he ordered a naval quarantine of Cuba.
I have taken the necessary steps to deploy our forces to be in a position to make effective the quarantine at 2 p.m. tomorrow, Greenwich time.
The use of the word quarantine legally distinguished this action from a blockade, which assumed a state of war existed. That same day, Kennedy sent a letter to Khrushchev, declaring that the United States would not permit offensive weapons to be delivered to Cuba, and demanded that the Soviets dismantle the missile bases already under construction or completed and return all offensive weapons back to the USSR.
Back to the USSR.
The letter was the first in a series of direct and indirect communications between the White House and the Kremlin throughout the remainder of the crisis. The president was quick to evoke the Monroe Doctrine. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. The Joint Chiefs of Staff announced a military readiness status of DEFCON 3 as U.S. naval forces began implementation of the quarantine, and plans accelerated for a military strike on Cuba. On October 24th, Khrushchev responded to Kennedy's message with a statement that the US blockade was an act of aggression, and that Soviet ships bound for Cuba would be ordered to proceed. Nevertheless, during October 24th and 25th, some ships turned back from the quarantine line. Others were stopped by US naval forces. With no apparent end to the crisis in sight, US forces were placed at DEFCON 2, meaning that a war involving the Strategic Air Command was imminent. Suddenly, the crisis took a dramatic turn. On October 26, ABC News correspondent John Scali reported to the White House that he had been approached by a Soviet agent suggesting that an agreement could be reached, in which the Soviets would remove their missiles from Cuba if the United States promised not to invade the island. Later that day, JFK received a long and emotional message from Nikita Khrushchev, in which the Russian leader raised the specter of nuclear holocaust and presented a proposed resolution, which was remarkably similar to the one reported by Scali earlier that day. If there is no intention, Khrushchev said, to doom the world to the catastrophe of thermonuclear war, then let us not only relax the forces pulling on the ends of the rope, let us take measures to untie the knot. We are ready for this.
Y'all ready for this?
These were some powerful words indeed. But there was a catch. The next day, Khrushchev sent another message indicating that any proposed deal must include the removal of US Jupiter missiles from Turkey. And just 3 hours later, the US U-2 reconnaissance jet was shot down over Cuba. Ignoring the second message from Nikita Sergeyevich, JFK responded to the first and the friendlier one. At the same time, Robert Kennedy then met secretly with the Soviet ambassador to the United States, Anatoly Dobrynin, and suggested that the US was planning to remove the missiles from Turkey anyway. But this could not be part of any public resolution of the missile crisis. The next morning, October 28th, Khrushchev issued a public statement that Soviet missiles would be dismantled and removed from Cuba, while the US removed their missiles from Turkey in April of 1963. This crisis clearly demonstrated the importance of direct communication between the two leaders, marking the opening of a direct telephone link between the White House and the Kremlin. This became known as the Hotline. This episode concludes our Cuban exploration. Next time, we shall meet in Italy before the start of World War I. Take care, and thanks for subscribing to, liking, and watching my channel, Rebels and Revolutions. So long!